For 32-year-old Stacy Hunsucker, life in Mount Holly, North Carolina, looked beautifully ordinary. She had married her high school sweetheart Joshua, and together they were raising their two daughters, Piper and Willow. To friends and neighbors, they were the picture of happiness, the kind of family people quietly admired. Stacy was bright, compassionate, endlessly devoted to her children. Everyone who knew her said the same thing: she had it all together. But beneath that flawless surface, something dark was stirring. A story so cold and deliberate that, by the end, no one who loved her would ever see life the same way again. And on September 23, 2018, Stacy's world would be torn apart in a way that seemed almost impossible. The kind of tragedy that at first glance looked like fate, but was anything but. Stacy Robinson had been born in Mecklenburg County, the daughter of John and Susie Robinson. She was the oldest girl, surrounded by siblings Eric, Paul, and Amy. After graduating from East Gaston High School, she earned an associate's degree in paralegal studies from Gaston College and began working at two respected law firms, Ted Grieve and Associates, and Reagan and Reagan. She was reliable, talented, and meticulous. Yet, after a few years, Stacy realized her heart belonged somewhere else, in a classroom. She transitioned into teaching preschool, first at First Baptist Charlotte, then First Methodist Preschool in Mount Holly, and finally at the local YMCA. Those who knew her at work said she radiated warmth. Her friend Shell O'Day remembered how Stacy loved crafting, designing hand-painted wooden signs she sold from home. In the summer of 2018, Shell had dropped by to pick up one of those signs, a cheery welcome piece Stacy had made for $50, and that small visit would be one of the last times she'd ever see her friend alive. Years earlier, while working at a department store, Stacy had met Joshua Lee Hunsucker. He was 2 years older, athletic and quick to smile. The first thing he ever said he noticed about her was her height. Stacy stood 5'11", Joshua 6'5". He asked her out again and again until she finally agreed. Both shared a passion for softball, joining the same team. Their chemistry grew quickly. They married in 2010 in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Friends described them as inseparable, the perfect couple. 2 beautiful daughters followed, Piper Elizabeth and Willow Darlene. Joshua, once a college football player, had become a flight paramedic with Atrium Health's MedCenter Air in 2013, a respected position that required advanced medical training. Stacy left her job to become a full-time homemaker, pouring her love into raising their girls. The couple appeared to have built the American dream: weekends at concerts, neighborhood cookouts, vacations to the coast. To the outside world, they were the family everyone wished they could be. But behind that perfect picture, cracks were quietly forming. In February 2013, shortly after giving birth to Piper, Stacy began experiencing strange health problems. Her heart rate dropping dangerously low, waves of fatigue, dizziness, and fainting. Doctors ran every test they could think of, but nothing made sense. Then, just 5 months later, tragedy struck again. A fire ripped through their home, destroying almost everything the family owned. Friends organized a GoFundMe campaign to help them recover, launched by a family friend, Suzanne Steinbroner. The page soon became more than a fundraiser. It turned into a record of Stacy's mysterious decline. Suzanne would later write updates about hospitalizations, ICU stays, and unexplained cardiac events. In November 2014, after giving birth to Willow, Stacy was rushed to the hospital again with her heart rate dangerously low. Her blood pressure crashed. She spent days in intensive care while doctors ran test after test. But the results offered no clues. Then, just weeks later, it happened again. In January 2015, Stacy suffered a cardiac arrest. Her heart stopped. She was placed on a ventilator as doctors fought to bring her back. Somehow, she survived. But the cause remained a mystery. A month later, in February 2015, doctors took an extreme step. They implanted a pacemaker. Stacy was only 29. For someone that young, a pacemaker was almost unheard of. Something inside her body was catastrophically wrong. At the time, no one realized the real cause of her failing heart wasn't natural at all. Every symptom, the erratic heart rate, the low blood pressure, the unexplained collapse, pointed to one chilling source: poisoning. Years later, investigators would uncover that Stacy's body had been slowly attacked by tetrahydrozoline, a chemical compound found in common eye drops. In small doses, it constricts blood vessels. In larger doses, that is when swallowed, it can stop a human heart. Joshua, with his medical background, would have known that. He would have known how to administer the chemical in doses that made Stacy sick, but not dead. At least not yet. He would have known it wouldn't show up on normal hospital tests. He would have known doctors would see a failing heart, not foul play. Her mother, Susie, had always sensed something was wrong. She'd often wake from nightmares, pick up the phone, and call her daughter, just to make sure she was okay. A mother's instinct, she'd later say. And I wish I'd listened harder. By 2018, years of medical bills had buried the young family in debt. The GoFundMe helped, but the strain was immense. Hospital stays, specialists, pacemaker surgery, all on one income. And through it all, Joshua appeared calm, collected. September 23, 2018, Joshua Hunsucker called 911 around 9 p.m., his voice steady but urgent. He said he'd found his wife unresponsive on the living room couch. When first responders arrived, Stacy was blue, pulseless, and not breathing. Paramedics tried everything. Nothing worked. At 32 years old, Stacy Robinson Hunsucker was pronounced dead. Her husband told police it must have been her heart. It always had been. She'd had the pacemaker, the history, the records. To doctors, it looked like another cardiac episode. The case was marked natural causes and closed, but even that night, things didn't add up. Joshua told one officer he'd stepped outside to lock the cars. There'd been break-ins nearby. To a friend, he said he'd been out for a walk. To another, that he'd been cutting wood for his craft projects. And to Stacy's mother, he said he'd been sitting at the table on his laptop, back turned, when he suddenly noticed her slumped over. 4 versions of the same moment. 4 entirely different stories. People who tell the truth rarely change their story. But Joshua's version seemed to shift with every question. Within days, he refused to allow an autopsy, something that stunned Stacy's family, especially because she'd registered as an organ donor. The hospital wanted to perform one, but Joshua flatly said no. 2 days later, Stacy was cremated. The speed was alarming. Most families take weeks to process the loss of a loved one. Joshua handled everything in 48 hours, and then immediately filed 2 life insurance claims totaling $250,000. Her parents noticed something else. Joshua didn't pay for the funeral. They did. During the service, he seemed distant, detached, almost distracted. Not the shattered husband everyone expected, and within weeks there was another woman. Joshua had hired a babysitter, Kaylin McDonald, to care for the girls. She noticed something odd right away. Joshua wasn't grieving, he was glowing, always smiling, always texting a woman named Jennifer Elkins, a colleague from Med Center Air. The two were inseparable. Joshua's co-workers were horrified. They told police how quickly he'd moved on, how openly affectionate he was with Jennifer, how indifferent he seemed about his wife's passing. And then came the money. Joshua collected the full $250,000 from Stacy's life insurance policies and went on a spending spree, buying a luxury boat, taking expensive vacations, paying off his mortgage. He'd once been crushed by debt. Now he was living freely, exuberantly, as if death had reset his life. To Stacy's mother, Susie, it was all the proof she needed. Her daughter's death was no accident. By the spring of 2019, 9 months had passed since Stacy's sudden death. Confusion and uneasy questions that no one seemed to want to answer. But her mother, Susie Robinson, could no longer ignore her instincts. Something deep inside her kept whispering that her daughter's story wasn't over. In May 2019, Susie made a decision that would change everything. She walked into the Mount Holly Police Department carrying a folder stuffed with notes, hospital records, and a mother's determination. She asked detectives to reopen Stacy's case. She told them about the odd symptoms, the rushed cremation, the life insurance policies, and the woman Joshua had moved in so quickly after. Detectives listened, politely at first, but the more they heard, the less the official story made sense. Why had a healthy 32-year-old woman died suddenly with no autopsy? Why had her husband blocked every medical question? And why did every path of motive, money, freedom, infidelity, lead straight back to him? Mount Holly police began quietly gathering records. They reached out to Atrium Health, where Joshua worked as a flight paramedic, and requested toxicology guidance. When specialists heard that Stacy's symptoms included severe bradycardia, fainting spells, and cardiac arrest with no known cause, one of them asked a chilling question: did she ever ingest tetrahydrozoline? It was the active ingredient in eye drop brands like Visine, perfectly legal, found in nearly every home, but potentially deadly if swallowed. In medical circles, it was known to constrict blood vessels so tightly that it could shut down vital organs. And because it metabolized quickly, it was nearly impossible to detect after death, especially after cremation. Investigators suddenly realized why Joshua had refused an autopsy. Cremation wasn't just closure, it was erasure. Still, suspicion alone wasn't proof. The detectives needed something tangible, a trace, a confession, a witness. And that's when they decided to dig deeper into Joshua's digital life. When they subpoenaed his phone and laptop records, the truth began to surface in browser histories, deleted searches, and encrypted messages. Forensic analysts uncovered Google queries that made every investigator's blood run cold. Eye drops deadly if swallowed. How long does tetrahydrozoline stay in the body? How to make a death look like natural causes. The dates of those searches? Weeks before Stacy's final collapse, detectives now had enough to suspect foul play. But they needed the story behind the motive. So they spoke to Joshua's co-workers, and one name came up again and again: Jennifer Elkins, his colleague and new girlfriend. Jennifer was described as friendly, attractive, and deeply entangled with Joshua long before Stacy died. One co-worker recalled seeing them holding hands at a work function months earlier. Another said Joshua openly referred to Jennifer as the love of my life, while his wife was still alive. As investigators dug into their text messages, the evidence turned explicit. There were hundreds of exchanges, affectionate, romantic, sometimes intimate, stretching back well before Stacy's death. In several, Joshua complained about his marriage, calling Stacy a burden and too sick to live. In others, he spoke of starting fresh, even hinting that he'd found a way out. That way out had been hidden in plain sight, inside a bottle of eye drops. Detectives now faced a difficult challenge, proving a chemical homicide with no physical remains. They knew they needed an expert, someone who could reconstruct what might have happened using medical data alone. Enter Dr. Douglas Miller, a toxicologist from the North Carolina office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Dr. Miller reviewed Stacy's complete medical history: the emergency visits, EKGs, cardiac arrest reports, and pacemaker logs. What he found was consistent with repeated dosing of tetrahydrozoline, unpredictable blood pressure drops, erratic heart rhythm, respiratory suppression. In his words, it fit like a puzzle piece. Meanwhile, police began interviewing those closest to Joshua. His babysitter, Kaylin McDonald, described his behavior in detail: the laughter, the vacations, the boat, the lack of grief. She also recalled seeing him pour drinks for Stacy on multiple occasions, and once noticing a small, clear bottle next to her cup. At the time, she hadn't thought anything of it. Now, it haunted her. Investigators tracked down receipts showing Joshua had purchased multiple bottles of eye drops in the months leading up to Stacy's death. Far more than any household could need. Each was bought from different stores around Gaston County, often late at night. By 2021, the pattern was undeniable, but Joshua still walked free. To the community, he was the charming paramedic, the devoted father. Behind closed doors, detectives were building a murder case that could finally expose him. Then came the break they'd been waiting for. A co-worker, Nick Ryan, approached police with a disturbing confession. He said Joshua had bragged one night during drinks that eye drops can stop a heart. At the time, Nick thought it was just medical trivia, but after hearing rumors of the reopened investigation, he realized what it meant. His statement gave prosecutors the final push they needed. In January 2022, a grand jury indicted Joshua Lee Hunsucker for first-degree murder. The arrest shocked the entire community. The man once praised as a hero for saving lives in the air was now accused of killing his own wife on the ground. When police arrived to take him into custody, Joshua showed little emotion, the same eerie calm he'd displayed the night Stacy died. Cameras captured him being led away in handcuffs, expression blank, eyes forward. The case became one of North Carolina's most chilling domestic murder stories, not just for its method, but for its cold calculation. Prosecutors described it as a crime of patience, a slow poisoning designed to mimic illness over years until death looked inevitable. Joshua pled not guilty, insisting that his wife had died from natural heart failure and that he had loved her deeply. But behind the legal defense, investigators knew they had something even stronger than physical evidence, a timeline of intention. The eye drop purchases, the online searches, the insurance claims, the new relationship. Every piece formed a portrait of premeditation. While awaiting trial, Joshua sat in the Gaston County jail, rarely speaking to reporters. Yet one small detail stood out. During his intake, officers catalogued his personal belongings. Among them, a single half-used bottle of Vicine.